A college football exec eyes contracts for NIL pay to make players obligated, in quotes, obligated to play bowl games. Now, I think this is something that is very, very necessary. I mean, we saw this last year. And say what you want about Florida State, say what you want about that squad. I would have loved to see them play Georgia. I would have loved to see that game. Florida State at full strength, minus their quarterback, obviously Jordan Travis because he got hurt, and then Georgia at full strength with Carson Beck, all their offensive weapons, all of their defensive weapons. I don't even know if everybody at Georgia played. I can't remember right now if Brock Bowers played and if some of their receivers, some of their defensive weapons have played. I can't even remember, but I would have loved to see them. I would have loved to see them compete against each other. During. I would have loved to see them compete against each other. Here's what it says: future name, image, and likeness (NIL) deals for college athletes could include stipulations requiring player participation in bowl games. So basically, now with a stipulation, that's like I don't even want to call it an incentive because it's not an incentive. It's like a requirement. So it's like if we're giving you this NIL money, then in turn you have to play 12 games plus a bowl game. You have to play 12 games plus playoff games, whatever it looks like. If you sign a contract and receive compensation, you're obligated to perform certain duties. In this case, play 12 regular season games and a bowl game, or a bowl game and the playoff. Carparelli said per Dinich. That's logical to expect. It's the way the rest of us working folks operate. 100%. And that's been the thing with like this transfer portal and NIL is like a lot of times these guys are getting this money. These guys are being able to go to whatever school they want. But a lot of this stuff is not real life. Like you don't just get to leave whenever you want. You don't just get to, take this money with no strings attached ever. That's not how people don't just give you money to give you money for your, I mean, if you have a name, image, and likeness, if you have a brand that can garner somebody some money, that can bring some money to another brand, that makes sense to give you that money. But also when people sign contracts in real life, no matter what their name, image, and likeness can garner them in compensation, there's always stipulations in these contracts. It's never just like, we'll give you this money and nothing from you. Like, what are we getting in return? How are we getting guarantees that like, you're going to be here for us for the full length of this contract? How are we getting guarantees that we're going to give you this money and you're going to fulfill your obligations to us? Now, with this new rule, I don't even know. It's not a new rule, but with this new development, I think it's a great idea. And I think it's something that definitely needs to be implemented. I would love to see this be implemented before this season starts so that we can see what it would look like in play. But it's just like, we will give you this money if you play 12 games in the regular season, 11 games if it's an FCS player, but I don't know how that would look because we play the playoffs anyway. So it's like if you're not making the playoffs, you don't get a postseason in the FCS. So yeah, that's why we do it the right way. Anyway, but if we're giving you this money, say whatever X dollar amount it is, you play 12 games, you play in this bowl game. If you don't, a percentage of that money has to come back to us, or all of the money has to come back to us. Would that like null and void the contract? I don't know, but I think it will make guys think twice about opting out. And I 100% get why guys opt out. I understand that like you want to protect your draft stock. You want to protect, you don't want to get hurt in a bowl game and hurt your draft stock, hurt your draft process. I get that. But from a fan's perspective, from a brand's perspective, like I can't even remember what bowl game. It was a New York Six bowl that Florida State played in against Georgia, and all the top Florida State players didn't play, and they got blown out by 60. And, from people who are the sponsors who are running that bowl game, that looks terrible for them because it's like these are supposed to be some of the top bowl games every year. These are the biggest sponsors. These are the most money bowl games. These are on national. I mean, I think a lot of the bowl games are on national television, but it's like these are on the big networks getting the good playing time slots. Like everything is set up for these to be the big money makers in bowl season outside of the college football playoff. And when one team doesn't even play all of their best players, that is bad business. That is bad business. So now that these players are getting paid, now that these players are getting these NIL deals of stupid amounts of money. I mean, it's probably not stupid amounts of money. Everybody says it's stupid amounts of money, but I don't really think it's truly stupid amounts of money. These kids are probably getting decent amounts of money, more than they probably would doing something else, but I think they deserve it. either way, these kids are getting good amounts of money through NIL. Make them fulfill some obligations. Make them have to, actually adhere to a real contract, like it would be in the NFL, like it would be in real life. I mean, if you sign a contract with a company, there are stipulations within that contract that would keep you from doing other things, would restrict you from working with other people, would hold you at that position for a certain amount of time. Like there's things in contracts that restrict people and have obligations that you have to fulfill. And so that being a development at the college football level with all of this NIL could be very instrumental. I think it could be very exciting. I think it's something that could, make these bowl games more exciting when you don't have all the opt-outs. And you'll probably still see opt-outs because, a lot of the guys there may be some guys who aren't under contracts like that. Like that we don't really know what this is going to look like. I think this is just an idea from an NFL, from a college football exec saying that this is how things should be moving going forward. And it's just like I said, like when NIL first became a thing, it was the Wild Wild West. Nobody really knew how to operate it. And, the NCAA just kind of, Florida kind of set things off and the NCAA kind of followed suit, saying, okay, yeah, we'll put some rules and regulations in place. But the rules and regulations in place were just kind of baseline. They didn't really know what they were doing. They didn't really have an idea of what NIL would look like. They didn't really have an idea of what the marketplace would look like. I think now the marketplace is starting to shape up. I think now they're starting to figure out what it needs to look like at the college football level. And I think they're figuring out how they need to regulate it at the college football level. So that's why we're seeing, as months go by, as years go by since NIL has been in place, that people are starting to figure out what's best to regulate it, what's best to, so this is something that I think could be very instrumental. This plan would involve universities bringing NIL collectives in-house, Calabre said, per Dellinger. So, just like I read last week about how, this would mean that the NIL would be regulated by like the athletic department instead of having these third-party collectives. This would bring the collectives in-house. So basically the NIL collective would be, I think at this point, NIL collectives are third party to the university, because technically before the rule that I talked about last week about how schools are now able to work with these third parties, meaning these collectives. Before that, the schools weren't allowed to be involved in NIL at all. They were there to regulate it. Obviously, like the athletic directors and the assistant athletic directors were there to regulate it, make sure rules were being followed. But in terms of having a hands-on approach to the NIL, I don't think schools were allowed to do that. Now, with the new rule that the Division I board put in a week or two ago, they're allowed to have a hand in NIL dealing with these third parties. Also, what they're saying basically to move into the contract stage of you have to play so many games, NIL would have to be an in-house thing for that to take place, I think, because that's the best way. That's the only way you can really regulate it, is through the athletic departments, through the athletic directors, the assistant athletic directors, all of that. Collectives, which help fund NIL offers for student athletes, currently operate independently from schools. Yeah, so I just said that, but man, this would be crazy. I would love to see like if there would be pushback from players on this. Because, I mean, I'm sure everybody sees something like this. Everybody from a fan perspective sees this and they're like, man, this is awesome. This is going to be amazing. But then you think about the players. Obviously, and this is why the players need a union. Because say what you want about, like, this being fair or unfair. Personally, I think that this is something that's needed. I would love to see all the best players playing bowl games. But I also do get, like, guys wanting to protect their draft stock. Like, I would never fault a guy for not wanting to play in a game to protect his draft stock. So I kind of play both sides, because I would love to see all these teams at full power in some of these bowl games. But I get it. Like, if you're not playing for a championship, there's no point to hurt your draft stock. So I think there's definitely going to be pushback from players on if something like this were to become real. And that's why a lot of people are saying now that these kids need a players association. They need somebody arguing in their best interest, because ultimately, just like I said at the beginning of this topic, was all those guys sitting out for that bowl game is bad for business. That's losing some of these big companies' money, because as many people as possible aren't tuning into the game because they know Florida State wasn't at full strength. So maybe they tap into the beginning of the game, but they're not going to watch the whole game because they see early into the first quarter, this is not going to be the game we want it to be. This is not going to be a tight game. This is not going to be a competitive game. Like, there's no point in us watching this. So I get that from a money standpoint, like the big companies want these guys to play in it. But like from a player's perspective, I would be like, why does this need to be a stipulation in the contract? So that's going to be something that, you know, when NIL becomes in-house, that's going to be something that the players and their association and the athletic directors association, or whatever is the governing body for NIL, are going to have to hash out. They're going to have to argue these points. They're going to have to, you know, argue for themselves. I think I don't think it's not something that's gonna go over easy. I don't think it's something that's just gonna, you know, somebody's gonna write it up and it's just gonna be passed. I think we're past that time of, you know, the NCAA and college football players getting taken advantage of. At this point, there's money on the table. Salary caps are being talked about. Revenue streams are being talked about. So many things are being talked about at this point in terms of college athletics and the power that these student athletes have. So I don't think just passing a rule like that in terms of making them obligated to play a certain amount of games and a bowl game is going to go over without any argument. So I think it's going to be very interesting. I think it's a good rule. I think it would be awesome. But I also get the player's perspective, having been a former player. So I understand, you know, why players would not want that to go through. I understand why players would not want something like that on the table. And it makes sense. You guys let me know what you think about in the comments. Do you think this is a good rule to put into place, or do you guys think they need to pump their brakes? Let me know, and we will move on. The NCAA could pay $2.7 billion or more in an NIL antitrust lawsuit settlement for past damages. The Grant House versus NCAA antitrust lawsuit may result in a settlement of more than $2.7 billion for past damages paid by the NCAA over a 10-year period, per ESPN's Pete Thamel, and Dan Murphy. Those payments would be made to college athletes who claimed they were illegally prohibited from profiting off their name, image, and likeness. Now, $2.7 billion is a lot. I would gotta think there's got to be a lot of players who are in this NCAA who are in this lawsuit because, like, I mean, I don't know. Those payments would be made for college athletes who are legally. In addition, the settlement would also go hand in hand with a pledge commitment from conferences and schools to share revenue with athletes. The number could be $20 million per year for an athlete revenue share per Thamel. Now, this is exciting. Revenue share? What was that? I was just talking about earlier about how contracts for NIL, and, you know, I mentioned when I was talking about that how, you know, revenue sharing could become a thing, how contracts could become a thing, NIL could be an in-house thing, and athletic departments would then be arguing these contracts, then be arguing these pay structures. But that would mean that the players would need a players association too, because the athletic directors and these universities are going to do what's best for them and their bottom line. Well, the athletes and themselves have to do what's best for them and their bottom lines and their families. So this is going to become a mini NFL professional league, like $20 million per year for an athlete, revenue share, like $20 million for, and I think that's a like per school, $20 million. I think that's the salary cap per school. I think I saw like between 17 and 20 million. That is, I mean, think about that on a 80-man roster, like an 85 man scholarship roster, 85 guys on scholarship, or even walk-ons. And that's the thing. I wouldn't even know what the structure would look like in terms of scholarships and like all of that. But just think about that spreading 20 million between 85 players. Like, how would you do that? Maybe I should do that in my next video and like break down what 20 million per would look like for, like, so your quarterback obviously is going to get a couple million. Your offensive line is going to get some money. Your defense, I mean, and that's the thing. I'm not a GM. And these athletic directors, like, obviously they're balancing budgets and stuff like that, but now they have to become like GMs. Like, does that mean now at the college level they're going to be hiring GMs to be able to manage rosters? Like, will your recruiting director now become your GM? Like, or I don't know. This is so very new. Schools will have the opportunity to share millions in revenue with athletes with a spending limit similar to a professional sports team salary cap. Estimates put the amount at 17 to 22 million per program. Though the amount could fluctuate. The figure was determined through a percentage, roughly 22% of an average of Power 4 athletic departments' revenue streams, most notably ticket sales, television contracts, and sponsorships, not donations. not donations. So that money would be coming from ticket sales, television contracts, and sponsorships. So those big company sponsors that you get money from, those television deals, which is the big money. The television deals is where the money comes from. That's where that money comes from, the television contracts, and obviously the ticket sales. A lot of money in ticket sales, depending on like Montana. I'm sure they make a lot of money in ticket sales. I think Montana in one of their playoff games came close to $1 million just in ticket sales. So, I mean, that alone is a big moneymaker for a lot of these schools. In addition, this case is scheduled to go on trial in January 2025, so next winter. Per ESPN, an NCAA loss in that case could eventually result in the association paying over $4 billion in damages. Paying $1.3 billion more certainly wouldn't be ideal for the NCAA, as an out-of-contract settlement on paper seems like a more palatable conclusion. Either way, this is exciting. And I got a whole host of questions if something like this happens. Like, I mean, 20 million per program? Like, what would that look like? I really want to break down like the pay scale and like who would be making what, and like, I mean, like, I don't know. This is wild. Like, man, 20 million is a lot of money. 20 million is a lot of money. And obviously when you're paying 85 scholarship players, like, that stuff goes fast, and then, you know, the conversation will then become like, I don't know. It's wild though. I think it's a very needed change in college football. I mean, I think college athletes go through a lot. You're going to school and you're also being a student. You're an athlete at the same time. An athlete is a full-time job. A student is damn near a full-time job too. So you're doing 2 full-time jobs at the same time. But you know, who makes what and how much is each player getting? I mean, who's arguing for these players? Who's putting the rosters together? I mean, is the head coach now going to be a head coach and a GM, or do you have to hire a GM? And then like, how does that work? Like, a lot of coaches in college like college because they get to have a really hands-on approach to everything. You know, you get to have a hands-on approach to offense, defense, special teams. You get to have a hands-on approach to what your roster looks like. You get to have a hands-on approach to what scheme you guys are running. Like, they get to be hands-on with everything. In the NFL, jobs are a little more spread out. Obviously, the head coach is still the head coach, but like, jobs are divvied out a little bit differently. And the GM, I think, a lot of times in NFL organizations is over the head coach. So it's like, I don't know. So it's like, is a college coach willing to give that up at the college level for a GM, or are they just willing to take on the extra job of putting the roster together and deciding pay structures? Like, I don't know if a head coach at college even has time like that. Like, there's so many considerations to take in for this, but you guys let me know what you guys think about this. You guys leave a comment, let me know, and we will move on.